We're back. And it's been a while, guys. This time, we have a guide on Shaman tanking, the new king on the block for tanking on Turtle WoW. And surprise, surprise, when put up against the other tanks, it's doing pretty well. A lot better than a lot of people expected, I believe. Hell, even for a class that it's not meant to be a tank at all. And even with the class changes, two changes that were made, it's a lot better than I even thought it would be. And as I mentioned in the Paladin guide, this is not an absolute guide. It's not going to make you the best Shaman tank. It's not going to make you the best player, but it'll get you pretty close into being a solid raider and a solid raid tank. And honestly, this is a new spec for me and for a lot of people, to be honest. So some of the information here might not be too accurate, and it's not going to be as accurate as I'd like it to be. So I'll do my best to give you the most up to date information as possible. And so we can all have a good time shaman tanking and proving people wrong. And as usual, if you like this video, you like this content, be sure to hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, or I'll know you're a Blizzard plant secretly trying to steal information on Classic Plus. Until the release of Ambershire a few months ago, this build, even by Turtle WoW standards, was still looked at as a meme. Even the meme specs on the server were buffed to the moon. People were still skeptical about it. Of all the current four tanks, warriors, shamans, paladins, druids, this is the most mechanically unique with its totem management, shields management, and lack of a tank cooldown. But somehow we've made it work. I have tanked MC, Oni, and Kara on a fresh 60, and I've done fairly well in all of them. Even some healers saying it's kind of easy to heal a shaman tank, and they take relatively less damage, it seems like. While I'm still new to shaman tanking, I'm not new to WoW and I'm not new to tanking, so I can gauge pretty easily how this class will perform as the server progresses into further raid content, which I believe will be fairly well. So let's jump in, breaking down the basics, the talent builds, gearing, consumes, the rotation and ability priorities, and things like that. Shaman tanking is very unique in the sense that early on, due to the lack of male items, it can feel pretty squishy, even by like low level standards. But I found that taking certain talents early on can solve these issues. At level 19, you can either take Lightning Strike or start putting points into Ancestral Guardian to start feeling more tanky in your leather gear. I personally recommend taking Lightning Strike as it'll give you another button to generate threat, which is a little bit more important at the earlier levels, and healers need stuff to do that early on anyway. But after 40, once you unlock male gear, things start becoming a lot easier and tanking becomes a breeze. Healers and dungeon groups just at first were on the fence about letting a shaman tank, but once they see the world of shaman tanking and how little damage they start taking, they're all in. Uh, Shaman, like Paladin, is a tank that comes with a ton of utility and its totems. I have included here two sets of totems that I like to use depending on if I need threat tank or a main tank scenario. Tankhance is also by far the most involved of all the tanks, maybe next to Fury Prot. But in my opinion, it makes it the most fun because you're constantly doing something. There's always a button to be pressed. And honestly, it's very enjoyable. Here's the good and the ugly of Tankhance, though. It has good threat, good damage reduction through passives, and high armor. Utility, a lot of utility. The bad is it's very mana hungry and it lacks those defensive cooldowns for those holy shit moments. And that's the core of shaman tanking is just going to be revolving around earth shocks and just generating a ton of threat. There's not going to be much active mitigation like holy shield, shield block, things like that. So when talking builds about Tankhance, there's a couple here that we like to go through. You have a couple of options here. So the first one is going to be our mitigation build, which we kind of will be rocking through Molten Core and Blackwing Lair until we start getting a couple more pieces here that have higher armor values and more agi to give us that dodge. And it's going to be dependent on shield specialization, which will increase our block by 5% and increase the amount we block by 30%. All the Tankhance builds are going to be very similar. The only difference is instead of putting 5 points into shield spec, we could either go into concussion here, which will increase our damage done with our fire, frost, and nature spells by 5%, or even flurry. So, speaking of the flurry build, I personally don't like it because I think it's less reliable than the consistent threat you would get from casting Earth Shock with an additional 5% damage. Due to our dependency on Agi, our crit is naturally high, but it's still a random proc based burst, which I'm not a fan of because I like the idea of the constant threat from Earth Shock, which is going to be doing big damage because of concussion, as well as from the buff from Storm Strike. And that's why I personally would rather use this one if I'm going for a threat build, which I might switch into here as we're progressing a little bit further in Molten Core and I'm taking a lot less damage with my gear. We also, for damage reduction, we have talents such as Ancestral Guardian, which increases our armor value by 15% and our dodge by 6, which is huge for tanking, especially early on. With our high agi, our dodge is always going to be just naturally high, as well as Spirit Armor increases the armor gained from shields by 30% and threat generated while wearing a shield by 10%. This is where most of your armor will come from because armor obviously has the highest armor value of all your items, and increase and getting an additional 30% from that is huge. We have our magical damage reduction here, which is elemental warding, which reduces the damage taken from fire, frost, and nature spells by 10%, which is also very crucial since most dragons will be dealing fire damage, most molten core enemies will be dealing fire damage, and you really want this 10% damage reduction. And lastly is our tank stance. Air quotes on tank stance. Our tank stance comes from elemental weapons, which it changes what gives our elemental imbues an additional effect. The one we care about is Rock Biter, reduces your damage taken by 10%, which is an additional mitigation ability. And you're always going to have Rock Biter up anyway, so you'll always have a passive 10% or damage reduction. And the reason we always want to have Rock Biter is because it gives us 35% additional crit from all sources. Or sorry, a 35% additional threat from all sources. And so you have a general idea of what it looks like. Here is our armor. We are at 55.7% damage reduction just based on our armor alone, not including the passive 10% damage reduction obtained from Rock Biter. And just to see that Rock Biter is not affecting that, we can click off Rock Biter here, put on Wind Fury, and we see we're still at 55.7. So technically in total, unbuffed, with Rock Biter, we are at 65.7 damage reduction, which is huge. It's kind of makes up for that lack of plate that we have. And so I'm gonna throw the builds up here on the screen. Obviously, you can see them as I'm explaining them. But those are the 3 builds I like to go with. There's one that I'm currently working on that I might make a separate video on, which is the Elemental Tank, which it will be very dependent on having good healers. And it's kind of more of a speed running meme spec that we're going to test out later on. Gearing. Gearing is what everybody wants to know. How do you gear a tank shaman? Gearing a tank shaman right now is very interesting because early on before AQ40, there's just not much mitigation mail. There's some pieces here and there that they've added just to kind of, fill in those gaps, but it's not enough. It's not enough to have a full mitigation set. So what do? We work with what we have. And luckily, early raids, we just won't be taking as much damage and the things don't hit as hard. So with our naturally high armor and a damage reduction from Rock Biter, it makes up for that lack of defensive cooldowns, and our damage reduction is just going to carry us most of the way. On the screen right now, I'm throwing up the stat priorities for threat and mitigation builds, just so you have an idea of what to look for and how to gear your shaman. And just like in my paladin video, down below is a spreadsheet to the gear items to be on the look for as we progress through content. I unfortunately have not had enough time to play Tankhance as much as I would like to, with, just rushing to get to raid. So I don't, and I having to make do with the gear that I was able to get for raid. So I don't have a great idea of what pre-bis looks like. If you do, great. Share it down below in the comments. So moving on. We will be talking about consumables. And yes, as a hybrid tank, just like a paladin, you will have just about every consumable under the sun. On the screen right now is what your buff bar is going to look like when you're fully consumed up with everything that's available right now in Ambershire. Your consumes will look a little bit different once more things come out. I right now will throw up on the screen what you want to grab before you go into a raid and what you'll need for progression. It's expensive, it hurts your wallet, but you need it, just like paladins. We flew by the last section, consumables, just it's not that interesting. This is where it really gets interesting, is our rotation. And this section will be a little bit longer than the last one, so let's just talk about everything we need to know. So the rotation for Tankhance at its core is very straightforward. You will pre-pull with either chain lightning or lightning bolt, depending on what kind of pull it is. So let's start with the single target pull. It will look something like this. We will drop our totems, recast lightning bolt, earth shock to secure threat, storm strike, earth shock, lightning strike, wait for earth shock CD. Do not waste the second storm strike stack. Earth shock again, storm strike, and repeat. And that will be your single target rotation. Now you can weave in your lightning shields into there if you need more threat. If you need more mana, you can weave into your water shield as well. Or if things are getting hairy, we'll switch over to earth shield. But I find that threat from Earthshock comboed with Storm Strike buff is very good. And just make sure to pick up your totems back up. Don't litter after the target's dead. Moving on to the AoE pool. It's very similar. We drop our totems. We precast Chain Lightning. We drop Nova Totem as things are moving in. We Storm Strike the main target. Drop Magma Totem only after Nova goes off. Then we start spreading around our threat with Earth Shock and Lightning Strike, dropping Nova Totem again, and just repeating this cycle. On another side note, with Lightning Shield, it can be added for more threat to your lightning strikes, but I find that it makes your management a bit tougher than already is without judging wisdom if you don't have a paladin. So use your discretion, but I personally keep switching back and forth between the two. All right. And that about wraps it up. That is our guide to make you a slightly better shaman tank. And just like in the paladin video, I will have useful things in the information box below. If you have any suggestions, any questions, just feel free to hit me up in the comments below. I'll reply to them as best as I can. And yeah, until next time, guys, peace out.